I've never seen so much confusion as I have in the last few months between Christians and how they should think about race and Black Lives Matter. Now, obviously, part of the tension has to do with politics and how Black Lives Matter is usually considered to be a leftist movement, and Christians are usually on the way other end of the spectrum. But that's not the only reason for the tension. In the last few months, I've seen a lot of Christians who have been looking for a way to affirm their conviction that Black people matter just as much as everyone else and deserve equality and fairness, but at the same time, they also feel uncomfortable with the organization Black Lives Matter and what they stand for. And here's a quick example of why. So if you haven't heard, it appears that someone leaked some Google documents from the Black Lives Matter organization, and these documents seem to be some sort of curriculum that's been created by the organization in order to teach children from early childhood through middle school, all the way through high school, and it's supposed to teach them how to think about race and equality, and I'll leave a link to it down below. Now, I don't know if this material is going to be mandatory material for all schools, and by next year, it's going to be put in all of our school systems. I wouldn't doubt it if so, but at this point, I don't have that information. As I read through some of these documents, my first thought was just how blatantly logically inconsistent these documents were when they talked about equality. In their early education kid-friendly guide for teaching kids, we read about the language that they use when they try to coach the teachers into teaching their kids about transgender affirmation. They tell their teachers to say something like this: everybody has the right to choose their own gender by listening to their own heart and mind. Everyone gets to choose if they are a girl, a boy, or both, or neither, or something else, and no one else gets to choose for them. According to the organization, the way that I'm supposed to come to know who or what I am is by listening to my heart. And if my heart tells me that I'm neither a boy or a girl and I'm really something else altogether, like a Lego, then I conclude myself to be that because I'm whatever I feel like I am. Now, first off, if you can be a boy and a girl at the same time and in the same sense as they seem to say above, then the words boy and girl can't mean anything, at least in not any sort of meaningful sense, since you can't be a boy and a girl at the same time without a contradiction. If there is no contradiction, then those words don't really mean anything at all. But even worse, did you catch that point there? They aren't just telling our children that they can decide how they feel and that can determine who they really are, but they're also saying that others have to accept it. So how you feel doesn't just determine who you are to yourself, but it also determines who you are to other people. Given that logic, what's to stop Trump from becoming the first female Black president next week? No, really, if he wakes up tomorrow and believes that he's a Black woman, then according to the logic of the Black Lives Matter organization, not only would he be a Black female, but the Black Lives Matter organization would have to accept it since no one can tell him otherwise, according to them. If that's the case, then please tell me why they also teach on the equality of Black women. They say, Black women is the building of women-centered spaces free from sexism, misogyny, and male-centeredness. There are some people who think that women are less important than men. We know that all people are important and have the right to be safe and talk about their own feelings. Not to mention, they also talk about patriarchy, defining it as a culture dominated and controlled by men's voices and perspectives. Well, if men become men and women become women based off of their thoughts that other people can't see, then there wouldn't be a possible way for Black Lives Matter to conclude that women are oppressed or that culture is dominated by men, since we can't read minds. Isn't this a clear case of the most hateful crime of assuming somebody's gender without asking them? But if I took this logic seriously, then there can't even be a Black Lives Matter organization. That logic also destroys the entire Black Lives Matter position.
Oh, really?
All right, just think about it. The concept that Black Lives Matter can only be true if there's something that makes someone Black in the first place. But as we just saw above, the way that we come to know who or what we are is based on our own internal thoughts that other people can't see just by looking at us physically. If the only way that we can tell what someone is if they tell us because we can't read minds, then if that's the case, there can only be discrimination towards people who have already identified themselves to be Black.
Debunked.
The entire logic of the organization is a logical disaster that, if taken consistently, destroys the very thing that they're trying to establish. So the organization is fundamentally illogical, and Christians are told to be lovers of truth and should be willing to follow the truth wherever it leads. This is one reason why Christians don't want to align with the organization Black Lives Matter. But second, the organization is also unbiblical. If you pay attention to how they talk, they have plenty of unbiblical views that are incompatible with historic Christianity. And one of them is that they're calling for the destruction of the nuclear family, which we as Christians believe is a God-ordained union that in some ways mirrors the gospel. This is in direct contrast to a historic Christian view of marriage. Their ideology is also based on critical race theory and Marxism, and they have a lot of aspects that Christians don't feel comfortable accepting. Now, there's plenty more examples, but I think at this point, you pretty much get my point. If this material is forced on our kids this year or next year, we don't have any problem with them teaching our kids that all lives are equal. But the problem is it teaches much, much more than that. Not only does the material train our kids to think illogically by training them to come to conclusions about reality in the exact wrong way, but it smuggles in all kinds of other baggage that's not only at odds with Christianity, but in my opinion, will only make our society a worse place. So this doesn't mean that Christians reject everything that Black Lives Matter says and stands for, but it also doesn't mean that Christians can accept these things. But even though Christians want to support the sentiment that Black Lives Matter, we also don't want to take on all of the other ideological baggage associated with the Black Lives Matter organization. So this is why Christians find themselves in the awkward position of wanting to affirm the slogan, but aren't able to support it because that would lead people to assume that they also affirm the ideology and the behavior of the organization. So that's why I decided to start the hashtag Black Lives Matter to Christ, and also created some t-shirts for Christians if they want to show support for the phrase, but also distinguish themselves from the organization. I also created some of the shirts as conversation starters that can hopefully be used to start conversations about how in the gospel we're all equally valuable, loved and adored by Christ, that we in Christ care immensely for anyone and everyone, including every Black life, and how we all have an equal need to receive the sacrifice of Christ on our behalf. Now, I plan to do another video detailing what the phrase means and what it doesn't mean, but for now, the basic idea of the hashtag is to make the distinction. So what we're trying to make clear is that all of us are equal in Christ, and although we may stand with Black Lives Matter on issues and sentiments of equality, we don't stand for their organization and the ideology. So go ahead and click the link in the description if you want one, and if you don't get one, just make sure that you share this video along with the hashtag so that way we can start up this conversation, which is much needed today. But the next time that you hear about your child's school wanting to indoctrinate your child into a nonsensical ideology, what are you going to say?
What do you mean?